Okay, so we all know the story of the American Revolution, right? But the really interesting part isn't the war itself. It's what didn't happen right after. And honestly, it's one of those questions that once you think about it, you can't stop thinking about it.
I mean, think about it. You've got the British Empire, the absolute undisputed superpower of the day. And they just, what? Gave up? They signed the treaty, packed up their stuff, and just walked away from this incredibly valuable continent. It makes you wonder, why didn't they just regroup and come back for round two?
And it's so easy to just think, okay, war's over, story's done. But that's not what was happening on the ground at all. The reality was way more tense. You still had British troops hanging out on the American frontier. The Royal Navy basically owned the Atlantic. Tensions were, sky high. The whole stage was perfectly set for another big fight. But it just never happened. So in this explainer, we're going to dig into exactly why.
All right, so to really get why Britain didn't come back, you have to understand a crucial point. By the end, this war wasn't even really about America anymore. Nope. What began as this little colonial rebellion, well, it had spun out of control and turned into something way, way bigger and a lot more dangerous for Britain.
And man, you can see just how fast it happened. First, France jumps in, seeing a chance to stick it to their old rival. Then, a year later, Spain joins the party. And then, hey, why not? The Dutch Republic declares war too. Suddenly, this isn't some colonial squabble. This is a full-blown world war.
And you can just imagine the chaos back in London. The empire was stretched incredibly thin. All of a sudden, they weren't just worrying about rebels in, say, Virginia. They had to defend their sugar islands in the Caribbean, outposts in West Africa, their holdings in India, and they were even worried about a potential invasion of England itself. America went from being the problem to just one of many, many fires they had to put out.
So fighting a war on that kind of global scale, yeah, that has a very predictable and very expensive outcome. It was absolutely crippling. By the time the dust settled, Britain was looking at a massive financial crisis.
The government had borrowed just staggering amounts of money to keep this whole thing going. The national debt wasn't just climbing, it was skyrocketing. This put them in a really tough spot. They had to start making some very cold, very difficult choices about where to put their money.
And this is where Parliament basically had to pull out a spreadsheet. It came down to a cold, hard calculation. Option A, spend an absolute fortune trying to reconquer a huge rebellious continent that was costing them a ton of money, or Option B, protect the colonies that were actually making them rich. And let me tell you, at that time, the sugar islands like Jamaica were just cash cows, unbelievably profitable, way more than America. So the choice was kind of obvious, wasn't it? Protect the real moneymakers.
Okay, so Britain's trying to get its finances in order, licking its wounds, and then, just when they thought they could catch a break, a brand new, massive threat pops up right on their doorstep. And this one was going to demand all of their attention for the next couple of decades.
Yeah, the French Revolution kicks off, and the chaos that came out of it was about to swallow Europe whole. It was like this giant political and military black hole, and right at the center of that storm was one guy, Napoleon Bonaparte. For the British, fighting Napoleon wasn't just another war. This was for all the marbles. It was a fight for their very survival. Every single ship, every soldier, every last penny they could find was poured into one single mission, stopping Napoleon from conquering all of Europe. Any thought of, hey, maybe we should go back to America? Yeah, that was completely and totally off the table.
But there was this one little window, one moment, where you might think, okay, here it is. This is when they go back. And that moment was the War of 1812. It was the first time since the Revolution that British soldiers were back fighting on American soil. And things got serious, fast. In August of 1814, a bunch of British troops, who were suddenly free because Napoleon had just been defeated for the first time, they literally marched into Washington, D.C. and burned the place down. They set fire to the Capitol building, the president's house. It was a pretty shocking moment for the young country. But here's the thing. Even with troops burning down the Capitol, there was never a grand plan for reconquest. The British goals were super limited and, really, defensive. All they wanted was to protect Canada from being invaded by the Americans and force a peace treaty as quickly as possible. They wanted out, not back in. And here's why. By the time the whole Napoleon saga was finally over in 1815, the American problem had gotten, well, a whole lot bigger. In just about 30 years, the population of the U.S. had tripled. Think about that. The country was just too big, had too many people, and was way too far away to even think about controlling anymore. Trying to occupy it would have been a nightmare,
a super expensive, never-ending guerrilla war.
Which brings us to the last piece of the puzzle. And honestly, this might be the most important reason of all. Britain didn't just walk away from America, it pivoted. They completely changed their strategy. A whole new relationship was starting to form, one that wasn't about control, it was about cash. See, back in Britain, the Industrial Revolution was really taking off. Their factories were churning out goods, and to keep that engine running, they needed two things desperately: raw materials, especially cotton, and places to sell all the stuff they were making. And guess who could provide both of those things perfectly?
Yep, the independent United States. So the choice became dead simple. On the one hand, you could try to rule America, which meant spending a ton of money, dealing with constant rebellions, and just one giant headache after another. Or you could just trade with America. That gave you all the economic perks, all the cotton, a huge market with none of the hassle. No armies to pay for, no politicians to argue with. I mean, why go through the trouble of ruling when you could just make money?
And really, that's the ultimate punchline to this whole story. In the end, what looked like Britain's greatest defeat actually turned into a really smart, really profitable move. They didn't just lose a colony, they gained their biggest customer. They let America go, and by doing that, they basically locked in their most important trading partner for the next 100 years.
So it really leaves you with a pretty cool what if to chew on, right? What if Britain had decided to go all in on retaking America instead of fighting Napoleon? How different would the world look today? Was an independent USA inevitable, or did it all just come down to a series of really pragmatic decisions? Something to think about.